Hello, everyone. Welcome to Living Sufism. A couple of items before we begin. One is to remind you that we have a website for this program, which is continuing to accrue a lot of wonderful material. To access that material, simply go to the sufiway.org, one way, sufiway.org, one word, sufiway.org. And there click on programs, and you'll see Living Sufism there. Please have a look at the web pages that have come together so far. As we go forward, it's helpful to refer to these web pages from time to time to keep the process alive throughout these 6 months that we are together. I'd also like to remind you, please stay in speaker view and have your microphones muted. We will have a substantial breakout session in this portion of Living Sufism. And during that time, you can go to gallery view and, of course, unmute your mic so that you can converse with your group participants. But for the duration of the program, otherwise, please stay in speaker view and with your mic muted. Appreciate that. Well, my friends, here we are entering sort of the midway point of this journey, reaching out, reaching in. And it may be a good point to remind us that this idea of reaching out, reaching in suggests that the world we are in today needs help, to put it simply. And many of us, if not all of us, feel drawn to do something, say something, have some input, recognizing that perhaps in our lifetimes, the planet and the species have never been so challenged as they are today. In suggesting that reaching out, reaching in is an approach to this situation, we're saying if you're going to reach out, maybe you should also reach in. And by that, we mean something very simple. To the best of our ability, let us recognize ourselves in the world. Let's not be a savior or a knight in shining armor running to save the world. It is we who we are addressing. Reaching out, reaching in suggests that the world I'm seeking to serve is a reflection of myself. And in proposing that the sort of attitude, we might say, through which we might do that is love in a divided world, we're suggesting that this reaching out, reaching in is a heart-centered process, which brings us to the theme today, the dormant heart. What we mean by heart is beautifully expressed frequently by Pir Elias in his notes from the open path and in the flashes that arrive in our email box every Sunday morning. Pir Elias is actually sharing with us a vision of the human possibilities that exist when our hearts are awakened, alive, present. This is beautifully captured in the flashes of today, the last two lines of which are, "What strength can we call on to stop this madness? You take my hand and we climb the stairs." That's what we mean by heart. And by the way, if you are not subscribed to flashes of the notes from the open path, again, please go to the sufiway.org. In my view, there are not many today who are speaking, communicating as clearly as Pir Elias is about a heart-centered, heart-aware response to the world that we are in today. I personally find his messages therapeutic as well as alive with guidance. This theme of heart, for many of us who are here today, it may be that for many of us who are here today, the theme of heart came alive in our relationship with Murshid Fazl Inayat Khan, the founder of the Sufi way. And so we thought to begin with, we might have a brief conversation among four of us who are here, who knew him, worked with him, lived with him, and each in our own way had, quite life-transforming experiences in our relationships with him. And so I thought it would be interesting to have Isha Francis, Suzanne Inayat Khan, and Bina Taylor and myself speak to our experience of Fazl and how we understood his, could we say teachings? Not really. His promptings, his inspiration about heart. So let's begin that conversation. Welcome, Bina, Suzanne, Isha. It's so lovely to have you here. I know there are many in our audience who, like us, lived and worked with him and knew him well. There's a photograph of him behind me that I took in the early 70s at one of our work camps in Germany. So it would be lovely to invite him to be present with us today. So, what do we have to say?
Where to begin, huh? I met him in 1976. I was just 23. And I can still feel how it felt. That first moment when I was able to sit cross-legged on the grass in those days. And it's really hard to put into words, but he gave me somehow the awakening in my heart to be me, the biggest and the best me that I could be. I can't explain how he did that, except to say that I did feel his love, but that love felt powerful and strong. It felt transformative. It didn't feel personal. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't sentimental. It was kind of more than that. And I knew that that's what I longed for. And that's how come I stayed.
Beautiful.
I think for some of us males, particularly when first arriving in the that sphere of influence, there was a tendency to not quite deify, but certainly put this very unique person on a bit of a pedestal to maybe it was a part of the fana experience, that you have to find a way to surrender to that spirit. But in truth, that reality found its way to come tumbling down into another form very easily. And now looking at it, and I want to say first, just a quick bow to the countless others who have had some experience with this particular person in their life. I'm not trying to touch on what anybody else's experience was, and I can't take a measure of depth or breadth in comparison. But what I appreciate now is that I never felt a moment when I did not see that he knew that he was a work in progress, that he was not, in fact, placing himself on that pedestal, that was my effort to try to find a definition of who the hell he was. And that he was a work in progress meant, therefore, that I was.
Yeah.
and that I continue to this day,
Yeah.
Lord knows, to be that, because there is no accounting for all of the things that I have forgotten, and the ways I could behave better, and the goals that I have yet to touch upon. So in a certain fashion, that's one of the things that I cherish about my memory of the experience with him, is that we were constantly working at something.
Yeah.
We were constantly working at it.
Yeah.
And in those days, it meant virtually 24/7, all the time.
Yeah.
You just, the moment you forgot, something happened to remind you.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, yeah. Wow, yeah, I share much of that. When I first came to the Hunka, the spiritual community that Murshid Fazl had created, I think already for some years. So 75 when I arrived, it was like entering a massive heart space. That's what I remember, where pretty much nothing was off limits. There just seemed to be all this love flowing. At the same time, there were squabbles. There was somebody shouting about who opened the oven door because the bread was supposed to be cooking, and there were love affairs. I've begun to suss this was going on with that. And Murshid Fazl was at the heart of that. And so it was about heart and relationship. It was like a palace of mirrors. And I was hooked, I guess. But I was also hugely in awe of him and intimidated. I found myself feeling intimidated, and so I could barely sort of speak in front of him, which is funny for people who know me being so chatty. And but when I got involved in one of the businesses, which most of us got roped in the community, and I was managing Omnibus, that's when I began to have more of a connection with him and working with him. And I was just astonished at the belief that he placed in me. I mean, letting me take this van of books from Holland to the UK when I just got my license. I mean, it was dodgy. I wouldn't have backed me, actually. And I was so moved by that. And I guess for me, what really stands out is, and I think you referred to it, Isha, is actually through him, I grew to love the work. And by that, it's, in all forms, psychological, spiritual. I think for him, it was one contiguous space, just like our nurturing our inner life and the hunker. We went out there and we did it in life. There were, the inside, the outside, the reaching in, the reaching out. He very much, for me, embodied that. And the last 5 years, I did a lot of personal work with him, psychological work. And it was, I felt like I had a massive ally, even though he challenged me hugely. But it was, and at the end saying, you've done it. And I'm not sure I quite believed that, but it was just this faith and depth. And it was about love, really. That I felt it had opened my heart. I kept saying, is this psychological? Is this spiritual? No, it just opened my heart. And he was so instrumental in that. So, eternal gratitude. Yeah.
One day we drove into Paris, Murshid and myself, in one of the old rickety vans, and parked the van and started to walk down the Champs-Élysées, and there was a kiosk with magazines, and I kind of went over to the kiosk, and he jumped ahead of me and he pulled a magazine off and handed it to me. He says, "You're looking for this one." And I said, "How did you know that?" And he said, "Because you're so predictable." And when I think about how he awakened my heart and taught so deeply at such a deep level, it was never about sitting down and talking about the heart.
No.
He rarely did that. He rarely talked about spiritual things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the way he did that was that he invited, maybe insisted, certainly pushed, prodded us, me personally, to be more curious, to not be so predictable, to have a wider field of interest. You want to think that that's about the intellect, but no, it's about the heart, because the more you go, the more you realize that that's where all the knowledge is based. He awakened our hearts, my heart, I should say, not through preaching or lecturing, but through helping me see how I avoided things, especially conflict. And helped me understand that my avoidance was a form of sheltering my heart. It was a way of not participating in my own life.
Yeah.
And famously, as when many of us struggled through this, as he emerged more into the psychological dimension, recognizing that, you know, if you're not together as a human being, how are you ever going to climb this ladder? He invited us not to shun our shadows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, what does this have to do with the heart? You have to live through it to see what it is. And so when we're speaking of heart today, it's not about, of course it's about love, but it's not about the sentimental, elevated, idealistic. It's recognizing that the heart has its reasons that reason knows nothing of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any
Many-
final thoughts before we move on?
Well, I had a, sorry, do you want to go, Suzanne?
No.
I had a quote that's actually from Jung, whom I know that Moshe, you know, admired much of Jung's thinkings. And this speaks to psychotherapy, and but I suppose you could equally say all the theories Moshe had and Fazl had in his disposal, both in psychotherapy, all the teachings, which I know he referred to and was guided by. But I think this quote speaks to something I really experienced with him. It says, learn your theories well, but leave them at the door. When you meet the miracle of the living soul at the door. And I felt that's really how I was met by him. It's very, thank you.
Yeah.
I think one other memory I would like to share, and this has to do with an interesting piece to all of this, is that for me, for example, while I had some intermittent contact with him after 1985, 86, somewhere in there, maybe, I didn't have a lot. And in fact, was going to go see him. We were going to go visit the summer that he died. But so my experience is before much of what, for example, Bina would have had with him, and Suzanne would have shared with him over a longer period of time. But I wanted to just remember that I wanted to bring this one thing out that I remember in those early years when we first arrived. A bunch of us first arrived all at the same time at this mysterious place called the Hunka, Abadanabad, from everlasting to everlasting, was that we called it the orange juice squeezer. And the reason we did that was because every day we felt like something was happening that was squeezing it out of us, whatever it was, whether it was pain or suffering or anger or love or joy or whatever. It was forcing us to admit to it, to be it in a fashion that life had not up to that time asked of us.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
I wanted to say a last thing about him, which was that he wasn't Murshid Fazl for himself. He never wanted his things published. He never wanted his words to be static and there. His recordings, there are nearly 700 recordings of him in the archives, but only a handful were ever allowed to be put out, you know. And because he never wanted to be a guru, he never did any of it for himself. He did it for us. He did it, he offered himself. He was dedicated and devoted to Inayat Khan and to the Sufi message and to the Tariqa, to the Sufi way. to its onward transmission. And I feel it's important to me that I say that. He wasn't about him and us then. It was about the whole thing. It was about life.
Mm.
Thank you all. You know, just to mention that this kind of reflection, as Suzanne says, Murshid didn't want to be known in a third party. And it's fitting that after he passed, a group of his friends decided to put together a book of these kinds of reflections, the stories. The book is called The Heart of the Sufi. It's available on Amazon. I've put a link to it on the webpage. So if you want to continue this kind of reflection of how he was experienced by so many people, I encourage you, you can get a Kindle edition of that book. It's very inexpensive. I encourage you to touch into that and let Fazl tickle your heart. We're moving now into some personal reflections, observations, confessions of the heart. Isha will introduce that. Isha?
Thank you. And thank you, Puran, for the idea of having this little conversation we just had. It's always a painful delight to remember that part of my life. Our stories of Fazl, his teachings and what we received from and through him, lead us to recognize something that we all share. And that is, to be holy and living human, we must not deny the fullness of who and what we are. For to the extent we deny our nature, that we hide from or shut out our experience of life, to that extent, our capacity to reach out or to reach in, to be able and available to be of loving service, will lack depth and scope. It will lack some capacity of heart. And before you move into the small breakout groups this morning, you're going to hear 3 stories of broken and opened hearts. These stories that will be shared touch upon some of the most tender and delicate experiences we can imagine. More than likely, many, if not all of you, will feel something kindred in response to what you hear. Listen deeply. Listen deeply, I ask of you. Listen with your hearts. Know that there is a wholeness to these stories. There is a truth within each of them that tells not just of the pain or suffering or loss that can and will hurt us deeply as we live, but also speaks of what is next. For there is always the possibility, if we open to it, of something next, really of something we do next. We survive, we learn, we struggle, and we grow. And each step along that way, heart is happening. Perhaps at first we don't see it, we don't feel it. But gradually, as these stories can teach us, we center around this realization that we are here in our hearts, of our hearts, in truth, with no limit. No limit. Bina?
Thank you, Isha. Welcome, everyone. You know, I'm going to plunge right into the heart of these times, and I ask that you bear with me. War does not obliterate love. I see it flourishing, expressed in acts of kindness, courage, and solidarity. Along with millions, I gaze at my screen each day, clicking on to another episode of this unfolding drama of human suffering and escalating devastation that also speaks to resilience, bravery, and resistance, a burning flame in the darkness. I scroll through pictures of families with young children who've crossed borders, read stories of insurmountable barriers as they try to flee. I watch videos of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, speaking of what they are facing, having left everything behind. I try to picture what it would be like if I were presented with such a choice. One suitcase, 1 hour, one train to scramble onto. Then there are the many, actually most, who are staying to defend their country, their homes, their families, regardless of outcome. I wonder too what's happening to the wild animals and the birds that I don't see. Have they found safe places in these cities bombarded by missiles, sought refuge in forests to escape the burning? What are the trees saying to each other in their underground communications? What are they whispering? What wisdom can they offer us under these darkened skies? If only we would listen. Although just 40 hours by car from my village in Spain, where the bell is now ringing, Ukraine is a country I never thought much about before, but with which I now feel a real kinship. Despite my appetite for news, I feel uncomfortable being a voyeur from my safe couch right here in a house whose windows rattle because of wind, not bombs. As I bear witness, a part of me wants to go there and share in their pain. Dilute by even one drop their fears. I want to get closer to their passionate hearts, drumming to life on the edge. My heart is moved by all this, opened by the grief and distress this horror brings and evokes, as well as deep admiration for people's care for each other and their homeland. I don't have a homeland as such, having roamed for so long, although I have strong affiliations with several. I wonder what it's like to wave a flag, sing an anthem, and be willing to risk everything for a country. I certainly would not do it for the country I grew up in. Even though significant shifts have been made since I fled 50 years ago, when I could no longer bear the pain, anger, and guilt of what was happening to most of those who lived there under the edict of apartheid's institutional cruelty. Some Russians, I'm sure, feel similarly, and we see more and more bravely protesting to their cost. I salute them. For me, what is happening in Ukraine touches me beyond feeling human connection and care for those who are suffering. It feels deeply personal. Having had family members who fought and were interned during World War II, I grew up with the belief, grounded in equality and justice, that Europe must be safeguarded. Idealistic, or illusory even, the idea of Europe, which had moved beyond war, is as close to a homeland as I can be. All indications are the spillage is far from over, worse to come, with no convincing narrative yet of how peace can be restored. Already there are repercussions throwing long shadows. Yet there is still so much light and serendipity too, as an experience I had earlier today showed me. Taking the bus from Malaga, I found myself sitting with Ukrainian refugees, my reserved seat next to one of the women. They were on their way to Almeria, where they can stay for now. After a long and dangerous journey across Ukraine, this family managed to cross the Romanian border with helpers and fly to Malaga from Bucharest, arriving near midnight last night. 3 generations, 2 children aged 9 and 6, their menfolk left behind. In shock, in fact, the grandmother was having a hard time breathing from all the stress, and we had to ask the bus to stop and take her for a walkabout. In shock, but grateful, although worried about loved ones and the state of their country, missing the men they'd left behind dearly. Viola, who speaks good English, said it felt good to talk and make contact, as indeed it was for me too. I said that I would tonight speak of this, and she said, "Thank you. We want our stories told." As I alighted, we hugged and exchanged numbers, and I said, "Please call, please. We want to help." So my heart is open. Even in the relative stability of where I live, there is no place for a dormant heart. It's the very least we can do to cherish hope and love more. Thank you. Gabriel.
Thank you, Bina. I would say that my heart was mostly dormant in the first half of my life, and then went to broken and awakened almost simultaneously. How else could a 13-year-old boy survive the horrible Holocaust in Hungary and the loss of his father, but with a defended heart? Later, I got my education in Canada, married, had children, and a career, still with mainly a dormant heart. It was the 9-year struggle of Annie, my first wife, with her brain cancer operations that tested me the most. Looking after her and keeping the family together was my focus. I tried to stay on an even keel, not let the downs and ups get to me, while those around me were alternately downcast or elated. I had to be strong, confiding my 45-year-old self only to a daily journal. I had no counselor or therapist, but did begin to read about psychology, religion, and spirituality. At the end, I sat with Annie, who was in a coma. I was counting her halting breath. I was in a turmoil. Why is she dying rather than I? Why us? Why isn't she gone yet? And feeling guilty. On the last evening, after spending all my days and nights at the hospital, I was driving home, listening to a Bach cantata. Suddenly, I cried out to a God I didn't think I believed in, giving up, surrendering myself to whatever will be. Surrendering to whatever will be. The conflicts and turmoil suddenly ceased. I was at peace. Early the next morning, the hospital phoned that she was gone. I just said, thank God. That was the beginning of the spiritual awakening of my heart. It was only then that I could accept that we could all die at any time. Even I could die. That there was non-existence, which makes it all the more amazing that there is any existence at all, as the seers and cosmologists tell us. Ever since then, I have been constantly thankful for our life as human beings on this wonderful and sometimes difficult earth. This peace and acceptance carried me over the next few months, even as I was grieving, really only for the first time in my life, for Annie, for my father, my other losses. I found a universal Sufi spiritual path. Often, for the first 10 years or so after Annie's dying, I was still crying inside me at meetings and retreats. As the couple that I was part of got shattered, my heart had been broken and took a long time to heal. There was a mingling of sorrow and joy during those years. Within a year of my loss, I amazingly found a new love and a new family. Now, after 45 years together, I at age 90, Kathy at age 80, we are fortunate to have a wonderful family of 5 children, 10 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. The emotional and spiritual healing, opening, and growth is going on to this day. I have been able to participate in the burgeoning interfaith and interspiritual movements as a writer, speaker, and Sharag minister. My motto is unity in diversity. Unity in diversity. In my 80s, with 3 major operations, I found a new equanimity. I want to go on living, but it doesn't matter that much how long I have left. I still want to get many things done, but it doesn't matter how many of them I will manage. A friend and I have been exchanging a daily email of gratitude every day for a whole year now. And there is always something to be grateful for. I'd like to suggest that all our hearts are dormant, broken, and awake all the time, each to various degrees, in different proportions, at different times. We humans are very complex beings, but we can think and talk only in metaphors. The heart is a very important metaphor. We use it in many ways, in a bodily, emotional, mental, and spiritual sense. I fancy that for Sufis, the heart is the activity of the soul in touch with spirit. The heart is the activity of the soul in touch with spirit. And I am so grateful that we can experience it, even when we can't express it. Thank you. Angelica?
Thank you, Gabriel. Hello. As a young ballet dancer, my heart was full of passion and joy, bursting open regularly into the sheer beauty of the dance and the music. My body and my feet worked long, hard hours and understood the difference between good pain and bad pain. But sadly, I was yet to discover the difference between good and bad pain in real life, or so-called real life. What I am about to share refers to the distressing experience for many women and some men across the globe of human oppression and violence that happens not only in our war zones for all to see, but also behind the closed doors of the family home. Bear with me. This is upsetting, but I believe it's critically important for those of us who may have experienced this kind of private oppression, and those of us who don't know about it, to work towards finding our voice, telling our story, occupying our shadow, for the sake of the healing and the reopening, not only of our own hearts again, but also for the sake of the larger heart of humanity. The first physical attack in my case was from the air when I was 17. I thought I was play fighting with a boyfriend who I thought I shared a common language with and could trust, until his burning cigarette landed with precision, directed by his hand into the flesh of my right foot. My sense of shock, confusion, the bad pain in my foot, and now in my heart, led me to ask, why did you do that? He paused. Because we were fighting, he said. That's what I do when I fight. I learnt in that instant that unsolicited, harmful physical violence is present as a possibility behind closed doors from humans we think we're close to. When the second attack came, this time as a fist into my eye, I no longer asked why. I knew this was the wrong question. I began to realize that what I was witnessing and receiving, this senseless rage, this dangerous, cruel violence, stemmed from some mysterious, dark, primitive, and ancient human force. This was both a shocking wake-up call and the beginning of my self-protective emotional closing down for a while. My heart went into hiding as the attacks increased in severity and unpredictability. Fists into my body, locked doors, gravel picked up and rubbed into my cheek, knives thrust into tables in front of me. Oh, talking and telling just felt too dangerous at the time. It's so difficult to explain that. But after 12 long years, I did find my way out. And I started with determination to reclaim the joy in life that I already knew was there and had been protecting deep inside me. Being able to tell this story now is helpful. It's heart-opening. It gives me access to an aliveness and a creative sense of vulnerability that was trapped away in the parts of my heart that could not speak my story for many years afterwards. I can also finally feel my own anger about what happened. And I can feel compassion for myself and for him and for all of us. I'm struck now by the extent to which the depth of my own self-oppression in the face of this abuse has led to an unquenchable determination in me now to become more and more fully myself, more fully alive. As part of my healing, I returned to the question why. Why had I allowed this oppression and violence for so long? In a quest for self-knowledge, I entered into a long personal psychoanalysis in London in 1986. 5 days a week, 7 years on a couch, diving deeply into my unconscious mind to uncover an understanding of my history, my impulses, my defenses, why I'd ended up in that position. I also retrained to become a psychologist and a psychotherapist. I wanted to act by offering safe therapeutic spaces for others to reach for their own self-knowledge, their own voice, and to transform their own suffering into possibility. I turned back to dance, not to ballet, but to exploratory free dance, like the 5 rhythms. This dance practice continues to be a really joyful and precious vehicle for me up to the current time, re-inhabiting, expressing and transcending myself again and again, and for being with others from a truthful and vulnerable place. Last but not least, I found a spiritual community which offered an experience of belonging, a larger understanding of what it means to be human, and the possibility of finally starting to live from a vulnerability and an availability of myself that could feel safe. A vulnerability which I have learnt allows for humility, presence, intimacy, and compassion. Thank you. In a moment, we can meet each other now in small groups, about 20 minutes or so. I'd like to ask us to allow some silence together in our smaller groups. And I'd like to ask you to reach into your heart, see what may emerge. what may feel alive for you now, and trust that. And then to listen openly and deeply with an available heart to each other as you share what you've found. About halfway through, a short piece of written guidance will appear on your screen. Work with it as you see fit. Be sure to go into gallery view and to unmute for your small groups. We will now go into breakout groups.
Make sure you are muted. When our hearts have become activated from deep sharing and awakening of compassion, a sense of being held in some deep way, we can cross a threshold into a wider realm of heart. Sufis speak of ishq, a kind of love glue that holds the universe together. From this place of deep sharing, let us close our eyes. Feel into the love that has been awakened by listening into these stories, by being invited into the heart space of another. Brave hearts that continue loving even after being broken. By diving in to reveal our own stories of tender awakening. Soft landing places deep within our own hearts. Here we are, beloved community. Rest there for a moment. Extend your heart to your loved ones, all those who you have supported in your life, and all those whose hearts you may have unwittingly touched by a smile, a simple gesture of friendliness or care. Extend your heart also to those who have supported you in your life in a myriad of ways, both intentionally or unintentionally. The presence of heart pulses through our lives, something we all share, a mystery extending far beyond the physical organ. Feel the quality of this love that holds you, the texture and shape of the way it connects you. Rest there for a moment. The heart feels, and therefore, as we know from having one, we are open to the full gamut of emotion. In time, we come to embrace it all, and importantly, to channel love to where it is needed. As love reveals itself to be this divine glue, this ishq that embraces not just each of us individually, but creation as a whole, we come to realize a mutuality while it tugs at us in mysterious ways. We also instinctively tug at it. We direct to this mystery, this love, our heartfelt intention, our hopes, dreams, prayers, and wishes. For cataclysmic events such as the war in Ukraine, yes, but also for all those who suffer, especially those without hope, unseen or unacknowledged, for the health of the planet, and for humankind and all its descendants. In so doing, we extend beloved community in all directions. Feel the intimacy of this embrace. How on the one hand, we are fed, and on the other hand, we nurture, because we are embedded and securely held in a vast, encompassing metabolism whose portal is the heart. Quran.
Thank you, Bashira, and thank you all for hanging in with us, even though we're going well past the hour. To close this session, I would like just to remind us that if we need a framework, a concept, a way of understanding how we live the heart, how we live in an awakened heart, it's an extremely helpful view to remember that we're here on behalf of beloved community. This understanding of beloved community was given to us by Pierre Elias in an essay he wrote a year ago or so called Beloved Community. I encourage you to track that down. It's also on the webpage, and it's there on the Sufi Way website. Pierre Elias's expression of beloved community goes well beyond the common understanding of that term as being about social justice and community. He encourages us to recognize the vast beloved community that we are all a part of. And so it's wonderful that I can invite Pierre Elias himself to bring us to a close today. Elias?
Thank you, Puran. And thanks to all of you for being together here with us in this heartfelt contemplation together. I've been touched by many of the things that have been expressed today. One that stays in my mind is a phrase that Gabriel used something like, all of our hearts, he said, are dormant, broken, and awakening all the time. I found that such a sweet and humble way to express it. It's not as if we get to a point where we're these radiant hearts all the time, but that our humanness involves all of it. It's like our individual hearts are like a musical instrument that plays, all keys and minor and major and all of it. Sad and exultant and tender and fierce. And something also, a word that Bashira just used, the word portal. Our hearts are a portal. That touches me. A portal is basically empty. It's wide open, isn't it? It's a doorway, a passage. Because I've been wondering if this that we're calling heart has a quality. Could we say it is warm, or it is affectionate, or does it have a basic feeling tone? Or is it this portal that's wide open that allows us? It's as if our own hearts, going through all the conditions we do, and the suffering and the passion and the falling in love and the attachments, that these all teach us, these experiences open our individual hearts to what? To this heartness, this heartedness, this one heart, let's call it, of all. When we ask ourselves, okay, go to your heart center. And when we do that, we seek that center, we notice right away that the center has no point. It's no location. It's not even that it expands, it is boundless. And that's a very intimate and immediate experience. Go to your heart center and notice, whoa, it's somehow everywhere. And that's why, in Dzogchen, they speak of Buddha mind or Rigpa or awakening or pure awareness. They often refer to it as the Vajra heart, the indestructible heart, this heartedness of all. And I believe when we realize that our apparent individuality, our uniqueness, our wonderful uniqueness, each of us, and the loneliness of that uniqueness, that sense of separation or being just me, that these uniquenesses that we are expressions, when we realize that they are expressions of what? The one spirit, the one heart, this one light of all that shines through all. We sense it as a forever presence, without birth or death, and that our very bodies, our body is actually the body of the universe. We're one with this whole body, with this whole spirit. When we realize that, then our spontaneous expressions in life are sensitive, are compassionate, are guided by love, because it's all it's all us. It's all this. And ultimately, all this kind of work that we're doing together, it seems to be part of this shifting of our identity from this wonderful uniqueness and its stories and its sensations, and that we no longer grasp them as our basic identity, but we know that our basic identity, our root identity, is this heart, this one heart we share, this open and transparent and loving heart.